Hey, my name is Dwayne, and this is my intermediate GED math series. Today, we're doing lesson 7, which is on comparing decimals. When we talk about comparing decimals, we're talking about identifying whether one number that includes decimals is greater than or smaller than another number that includes decimals, or whether they could even be just equal. All right, so really quickly, before we get into comparing decimals, we need to get into the comparing of it all. All right, so let's say we got the numbers 4 and 5. All right, and we're going to compare these two numbers. Right? I think we all know 4 is less than 5. How do we show that? We show that with sort of the sideways caret. Right? So these carets, and there are a few others. There's also greater than, there's equal to, and then there's also these variations, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. But these sideways carets, I always think of them as like big mouths, or maybe like an alligator's mouth, right? They're always going to want to eat the bigger number, right? So we can kind of draw this as a poorly drawn Pac-Man or alligator thing, right? Give it some teeth. Yeah. All right. It's going to want to eat the bigger number. So the mouth always points to the bigger number. So in this case, 4 is less than 5. That mouth will be pointing towards the 5. Right? Some other examples, this would be 6 is greater than 3. This would be 2 is equal to 2. And then with greater than or equal to, we can either have something like 4 is greater than or equal to 3, or we could just have 4 is greater than or equal to 4. Right? So we got that greater than or equal to. It could go either way. Right? Same thing with less than or equal to. It could be 3 is less than or equal to 6, or it could just be 3 is less than or equal to 3. Right? So this is how we compare numbers. Right? When it comes to comparing decimals, we have to be intentional about the way we do it. Right? And here's why. Right? If you look at these two numbers here, 4.673 and 4.68, to the average person who maybe doesn't work with decimals all that often, you might be tempted to think that 4.673 is bigger than 4.68. Your reasoning could be that, well, 673 is bigger than 68. And that's true when it's a whole number, right? But when it's in a decimal, those rules we can't follow those rules anymore, right? What we do when we compare decimals is we have to line up these numbers by place value, right? So here's 4.673, and here's 4.68. Okay, next what we do is we go line by line to identify which of these numbers is going to be greater, right? So we always start at the left, right? And we compare these 4s. So we're comparing 4 and 4. Which one's greater? They're the same, right? Let's go to the next digit. We're comparing 6 and 6. Which one's bigger? They're the same. Next digit. We're comparing 7 and 8. 8 is bigger than 7. So we can actually stop right there, right? We already have enough information to know that 4.68 is actually bigger than 4.673. Right, so everything to the right of that place value, the 7 and 8 place value, that would be the hundredths. Everything to the right of the hundredths actually doesn't matter, right? 4.68 is bigger than 4.673, right? Even though there are more digits, it doesn't matter because when we compare numbers, we always go from the left to the right. Okay, let's try another one. Let's try 6.344 and 6.343. All right, so same thing as before. We're going to line these two up by their place values. All right, and then just to keep things organized, I like to draw columns. So we'll draw some columns here. All right, and then we start at the left, and we just compare these place values, or we compare these digits. So 6 is equal to 6. Okay, 3 is equal to 3. All right, 4 is equal to 4. But this column right here, 4 is greater than 3. So that tells us that 6.344 is bigger than 6.343. All right, let's try another one. Cool. let's compare 10.34 and 10.340, right? You might already have an inkling of what the answer is based on what we talked about in our last video, but just in case, let's line these puppies up, right? So 10.34, 10.340, right? I'm going to draw my columns, keep nice and organized. Cool, all right, and then we start comparing. So these ones are the same, these zeros are the same, these threes are the same, these fours are the same, and then we get here, we got nothing and 0, right? We already know we can always add, we can add infinite zeros at the end of a decimal. It doesn't change it, right? So I could put a 0 here in this blank spot, and that would tell us that even though these two numbers look different, 10.34 and 10.340, they're actually exactly the same. Okay, so just know that. Remember, you can always add zeros at the end of decimals. It does not change the meaning of the number. Okay? All right, let's look at one more example. We got 40.62. Oh, I need to give myself a little bit more space. All right, we got 40.62 and 4.62. Let's see which one's greater, right? Now, I want to remind you, when we line these guys up, to compare them, we have to line them up by their place value, right? That 4 in this first number, that's in the tens place. The 4 in the second number is actually in the ones place. So we gotta be really careful to line those up correctly. Okay, so I've got these lined up, and I think already you can see what the answer is gonna be. Probably even before we started, you knew what the answer was gonna be. But we're gonna start comparing, right? We got 4 compared to nothing. We can add a 0 here, because adding a 0 in front of a number doesn't change it either. But 4 is greater than 0, so right off the bat, we know 40.62 is greater than 4.62. In fact, I'm sure you already knew that before I showed you this. The point I wanted to make was make sure that when you're comparing decimals, you're always lining up by their place values, right? So tens go with tens, ones go with ones. In other words, your decimal should always be one on top of the other. Cool, right? So just to recap, line up your numbers by their place values. And so make sure that your decimal points are one on top of the other. And then compare from the left to the right. Starting from the left, if you go towards the right and you encounter a place value or one number is bigger than another number, you can stop. You found your bigger number. Everything to the right of that number doesn't matter when we're talking about comparing them. So anyway, cool, right? So after this, we took a look at the independent practice, and then we did the lesson review at the end of the lesson, and that is comparing decimals. Thanks for watching.